much, colleague. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Excellency, the Deputy Head of Mission from Republic of Azerbaijan Embassy, the Secretary General of Pakistan National Commission for UNESCO, Director General of PASTIC, the Pakistan Scientific and Technological Information Center of Pakistan Science Foundation, my colleague trainers from Malaysia, Osman and Aziz, dear participants. I know that there is a representative of JICA as well, Madam Shah. Teachers, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to you. Now, first of all, I thank you all for being here today. Despite some of the political gatherings around Islamabad, I am happy that the participants are here, and they are from different institutions across Pakistan, all provinces. But there are more participants from the Federal Directorate of Education, Islamabad, and Sakhar IBA University, community colleges, mainly because they are one of the collaborators, and we are jointly implementing a project that we jointly won from the UNESCO's participation program. And my sincere thanks to the Pakistan National Commission for UNESCO and Ministry of Education and Professional Development. I'm so grateful to my colleagues, international colleagues joining from France, which is very early morning for them, particularly Professor Pierre Lena and Simon Klein. One of our members of the ECO Science Foundation International Advisory Board, academician Dr. Lee Yi Chong from Kuala Lumpur. He is also online. And they have been strong collaborators of ECO Science Foundation. Now, most of you would know what ECO Science Foundation is, or you would have visited the website. So we are an intergovernmental organization of 10 countries, and those countries are Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, Iran, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Turkey, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. So all of Central Asia, Azerbaijan and Caucasus, and then Afghanistan, and the three founding members of ECO, Pakistan, Iran and Turkey. So we are a specialized agency of ECO, which is headquartered in Tehran. Our mandate is to promote and support, including fund, scientific, technological research, but also to promote the science, technology, innovation and education, as well as policy development in the member countries. And we try to do that not only by supporting and promoting collaboration within the member countries, but also focusing on South-South and South-South-North cooperation. And therefore, our collaborators are in Asia as well as Europe. France, through the Lepad Foundation, has been our collaborator for many years. Then under the Belt and Road programs, we are strong partners and collaborators of the Science, Technology, Innovation and Education program of the Belt and Road activities. ECO Science Foundation is kind of regional center declared for cooperation in STI within the country. Running, other than supporting the scientific research, have been to promote engineering qualification standardization within the region, so that the engineers from one country with that degree can also participate in engineering projects in other countries. That we have been doing through the Federation of Engineering Institutions in Asia Pacific, the FIAP. Pakistan is of course now signatory to the Washington Accord, which is engineering standard. And with the UNESCO, we have been promoting this accreditation within the region. Then we have been supporting scientific community to participate in science conferences in member countries. But one of our flagship program right from the inception has been the promotion and capacity building in what we call the inquiry-based science education, mainly for the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But you may call it STEM, STEAM, or whatever. But our focus is more on the approach of inquiry-based learning. And we have been conducting workshop for STEM subjects in this area. But since 2015, the Paris Agreement, which requires promotion of climate change education, because if we are to tackle the developments, which I do not want to go into the details, because my colleague, my friend, Professor Pierre Lena, who is one of the co-founders of LAPAD program, will be talking to you in detail. And you will go through, the participants will go through hands-on activities. So this program is a continuity of our inquiry-based science education program, specifically for climate change education. And I was just speaking with the Secretary General of Pakistan National Commission for UNESCO that this workshop should be taken more like an initiative, an introduction, which PNCU has supported. But as a follow-up, we would like to organize a high-level forum whereby we will bring our international collaborators and national experts to deliberate on where we are and how to go about it. And for me, how to go about any issue, I think the starting point is always education. Because if we educate not only our younger generation, but I very strongly believe that our policy makers as well. So, and Pakistan, including our other member states, but Pakistan is a signatory to the Paris Agreement, and it is our commitment to educate public at large in climate change. So forum plus then adding on to make this part of the school and university curriculum, but emphasizing on the methodology and approach. that we follow, which is inquiry-based learning. I'm so grateful to the founders of Lamalapad and the Office of Climate Change in Paris, Professor Pialena, and our other collaborator, the International Science Technology Innovation Center for South-South Cooperation, under the auspices of UNESCO, that is STIC in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And it is through STIC that we have two trainers come from Kuala Lumpur. I see Dr. Mohammad Mukhtar, the Vice Chancellor of Fiscal University. Doctor, sir, can you come to the front row, please? Now, we are talking already about, Dr. Sahab, about some of the skills in educating people. So technical skills, but skills in education and inquiry-based education as an approach. So I think their institution can also be, Mr. Secretary General of PNCU, their institution can also be one of the logical collaborators with us on this forum. We have these trainers who have been working together with our French colleagues, and I hope that participants will interact, learn and enjoy this learning, not only for themselves, but I hope that you will play a role of master trainer, so that when you go back to your institutions, you organize workshops there and train other teachers, because we consider teachers the key players for educating our future generations. And by future generations, I do not mean necessarily those young people who go on to pursue their careers in science technology, but really all of them, because whether they go on to become policymakers, the civil servants, or technocrats or bureaucrats, I think they all need to know the situation and must understand, and that's when the communication between the scientists, the thinkers and the decision makers takes place. With this, I welcome you all, and I hope that this workshop is going to be beneficial for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sumro. Now I request Mr. Syed Junaid Akhlaq Sahab, the Secretary General of the Pakistan National Commission for UNESCO, for his remarks. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Respected Professor Dr. Manzoor Hussain Somro Sahab, President ECO SF, respected Dr. Mukhtar Sahab, VC National Skills University, Deputy Head of Mission from Azerbaijan Embassy, distinguished speakers and trainers who came from abroad and who are available online, dear participants who have come from different parts of Pakistan for this training, representative of JICA, Assalamu alaikum and very warm welcome to this workshop. My name is Syed Junaid Akhlaq. I am Secretary General of Pakistan National Commission for UNESCO, as well as I am Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Education and Professional Training. On behalf of the Pakistan National Commission for UNESCO, I extend my warm congratulations to Sakhar IBA University. Apologies, I did not mention Sakhar IBA, who are our main partner in organizing this workshop, and Economic Cooperation Organization Science Foundation for organizing this capacity building workshop for science teachers on climate change education using inquiry-based science education pedagogy. The PNCU feel privileged to be associated with this very important training course as one of the sponsors. PNCU liaisons with the UNESCO and provide expert knowledge and advisory services in the field of education, science and culture. PNCU encourage participation of organizations in UNESCO participation program. I also highlight the role of UNESCO for providing UNESCO's participation program provide a mean of supporting the national, sub-regional or regional activities of member states that are in line with the global priorities. Ladies and gentlemen, the international community recognize the importance of education and training to address climate change issues. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, as Dr. Saab mentioned in his remarks earlier, the Paris Agreement and the associated action of our climate empowerment agenda call on governments to educate, empower and engage all stakeholders and major groups on policies and actions relating to climate change. Acting as a global advocate and aiming to strengthen capacities of governments to provide quality climate change education, UNESCO produces and shares knowledge, provides policy guidelines and technical support and implements projects on grounds. UNESCO encourages innovative approaches through networking and partnerships. Therefore, this capacity building workshop will be helpful to address this serious challenge which our country is facing. I am particularly grateful to the distinguished subject experts and foreign delegates who are conducting various technical sessions of this training for sharing their knowledge and expertise with young science teachers in coming days. Education is essential, as I mentioned earlier, education is essential to promote climate action. It helps people understand and address the impacts of climate crisis, empowering them with the knowledge, skills, values and attitudes needed to act as agent of the change. I am very pleased to note that a large number of science teachers from all over Pakistan are taking part in this training. I would like to mention here that collaboration with Sakar IBM has been immensely fruitful, and PNC would like to extend this mutually beneficial cooperation in future also. I thank everyone who is participating in this training course and hope that you will find it very useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Akhlaq Sir. Next, I am pleased to play the recorded message of our keynote speaker, Professor Pei Lena. As President Sumro already mentioned, he is one of the strong collaborators of the foundation. Bilal, can we play right now? Yes. So, a bit about Pei Lena. Professor Lena is a member of the French Academy of Sciences. He is the honorary president and the former president of the Lamab Foundation, co-author of the world-renowned concept of science education, Lamalapa. The concept has been used as a standard of science education in French school education since 1996 and has been used by a number of other countries, including Pakistan and some other ECO member countries. So, please play.
Good morning, dear friends from Islamabad and the Eco Science Foundation. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you today. I thank Professor Mansour Sumro for his invitation, and I am happy to discuss the issues of climate measures education, which are the focus of your conference. So, I will move to my presentation. Education and climate change. And of course it's a big topic, so I am only giving to you an overview, which is the result of the work we have been doing since several years now on this subject in France, just in line with the Lamal Science Education Action, which you know very well since we have the education to cooperate on this subject. So, of course, climate change is a result which is told to us, to humanity, by scientists, by climate science. Climate science is a rather young science, maybe 50 years old, not more, and it's the convergence on the Earth system, seeing as a unique body, physical body, of many scientific disciplines: physics, chemistry, astronomy, meteorology, geology, biology, oceanography, and many other converge to give us the picture of what we call the was about 40,000 scientific papers dealing with climate change. So you can imagine that to provide a clear picture for politicians, economists, financial bodies, and also educators, a synthesis of this immense amount of scientific work is needed. That's the role of the Ipcc, a body created 30 years ago by United Nations, not to do research by itself, as some people believe, but to gather all the evidence that those 40,000 papers are providing every year with more details, sometimes better numbers, better probabilities, and so on. So the IPCC assessment reports come every 5 or 6 years. We had one in 2015. We have one which is just emerging now, in 2022, number 6. And in between, there are special reports on focusing on particular topics like global warming, the ocean and cryosphere, climate change in land. And to the right, you have the cover of the new report coming in 2022. This is the physical science basis. There are other documents for adaptation and attenuation, the two main topics of climate change. Adaptation meaning what is irreversible we have to act to protect ourselves against. For example, the rise of ocean, which will not stop even if we stop the climate effect of greenhouse gases tomorrow. And mitigation, that's the procedure to reduce the increase of temperature. Okay, those reports are focusing on the cause of climate change, which is clearly identified now. Humans modify the balance of the Earth's atmosphere. And this is due to 3 main factors: greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, CH4, and peroxide, nitrogen, N2O. And you can see on the graph this very well popularized graph, but which is always necessary to be explained, especially to teachers and by scientists whenever it's possible. On the left, you have about 1 million years on the horizontal scale, and on the right, a focus on the last 100 years. You see fluctuations on the long scale of time, which are due to astronomical causes, the change of the orbit of the Earth, creating the glaciations, and you see these variations of CO2, for instance, or of methane. But what is striking is on the right, when we look at the scale between 1900 and 2020, compared to the 1,000 years or 2,000 years before the advent of the Industrial Revolution, you see this stability followed by an incredible rise. Since now for CO2 we are above 400 ppm per million in the atmosphere, a level which, as you can see, has never been reached in the last 1 million years. So this is the phenomenon, and the impact of this phenomenon is the following. And I think this is the focus to be explained to teachers and to students, of course. Normally, during this last 1,000 years, 2,000 years, I took an example, the Earth is in energy balance. We receive solar energy from the sun, that's the left-hand graph, and the Earth radiates with infrared radiation energy outside. Of course, if there is exactly the same amount of incoming energy and outgoing energy, the temperature of the Earth is stable. I mean, the global mean temperature, which is around 18 degrees Celsius, and we have a stable global climate, which of course doesn't prevent local climate, desertic climate in your country, temperate climate in France, glacial climate in the poles, etc. But those are local climates. And the sum of all those local climates create what is called the global climate. That's something which is not sometimes is easily understood. On the right, we have the imbalance of climate today. We still have the same amount of solar energy, but not the same amount of absorbed solar energy by the Earth's surface and atmosphere. And this change of absorption is due to those increasing gases, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So you see the proportion of this excess energy which creates the imbalance. And because we are still producing more and more CO2, we are in this unstable regime waiting for a new balance which is to come in the future when this addition of energy will be stopped by appropriate mitigation in the atmosphere. So we are in what the physicists call the transition regime, the transition between the past stable climate before the Industrial Revolution and the future stable climate which we have not reached yet. Now this imbalance is caused by CO2. You have seen it, and CO2 is produced by combustions. 85% of our use of energy globally comes from combustion of essentially fossil fuels, gas, oil, coal, and the additional effect is essentially due to agriculture with the methane production. Okay, and you have on the left the graph for the years since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which is adopted to be 1850, roughly, the stable temperature, and then the current rise, and you see on the right that this rise has reached, at the moment, slightly above 1 degree Celsius. Let's always remember that those are mean values over the total surface of the Earth. It doesn't mean that locally the increase of temperature can be higher than it is there, and this explains, for instance, the heat waves which we have been observing in the northern hemisphere in several circumstances. So those are the scientific facts. Of course, you can imagine that to establish those facts, it needs a formidable amount of work. Now, those facts have impacts. I'm not going to detail those impacts, the risk for humanity, for coastal regions, for oceans, for biodiversity, etc., which are related to this climate change. But it's clear that there is a mission for education systems to educate to climate change, and we will see in detail what are the goals in this scientifically proven situation of this education. Let's remember the COP21 in Paris in 2015, where the Paris Agreement was voted at unanimity of the nearly 200 countries which were present at this conference. COP means a regular yearly conference of the parties, namely the states, gathered by United Nations and Ipcc. At the Paris COP and in the Paris Agreement, there is Article 12, which is undersigned by all those countries, saying that countries have the obligation to care for climate change education. So this is the focus of our work today and during your conference. We can express this goal with two prongs, two legs, building a critical mind and a hopeful heart among students. A critical mind because it requires to understand the science and the consequences and the possible actions, and a hopeful heart because we cannot raise the young generation in a desperate situation for their future, the future they will have in the coming 2, 3, 4 decades. So if we only do the catastrophic vision, give an example of that, and forget the hopeful heart, this is really dramatic for education. So we can outline 4 goals. The first one is to understand the science, the complexity. The second is to trust science, because this is complex. We cannot repeat all the computation like we do in a simple exercise in the classroom in physics or in chemistry. And so building the trust in the scientists means also understanding how do the scientists work to prepare those conclusions and to be convincing. And for instance, when they give probabilities, what do they mean by that? The third point is related to the hopeful heart. Become a creative actor of the climatic transition and contribute to find solutions. And this is, as you can imagine, essential for the youth, no matter in which country in the world, because they are ready, they are generous, they are willing to act, but they need propositions. And of course, the fourth aspect does not have to deal with knowledge, but with values. And we'll see example of that. And the chance is that students at this age, and that begins early in primary school, they are ready, they are full of life, they are ready to create and to innovate. Now, if we look at the report provided 3 years ago by UNESCO on a study on climate change education, how much was really done in countries? This report is interesting. It shows a great diversity of initiatives. So the Paris Agreement, Article 12, has been listened. But formal education is very slowly mobilized. Or, of course, it's in formal education that we can structure the scientific and active actions of the students. And the last remark on this report is that it's a general focus on environment rather than a specific focus on ecological transition and climate. I just give an example. It's very nice to care for waste in a school, in a classroom. You clean the classroom, you clean the surrounding, you work for the environment. Fine. But does that help to understand climate change with all its complexity and the action to contribute to a change? Probably not so much. So to do that, we need to go beyond what this report analyzed. So let's do that. First, we have to observe that the basic knowledge comes from hard science. I have explained that. But adaptation and mitigation strategies call not only for technology and hard science, but for social sciences, because they require local decisions from the communities, the cities, the families, but also from the governments, and global decisions, international discussions and action. Now, let's survey the youth attitude in various countries. In a sense, we could say, we educators, that the young people are our allies in this action. they are the ones which call for education to act. I will give a few examples of what happened at the COP last year in Glasgow, in Scotland. Some progress with respect to this 2019 UNESCO report. Then propose to use some principles for action in classrooms, and of course, those will be developed in the last, in the workshop that we will organize with you and many other, of course, during the course of this conference. And then I will try to give you an overview of some example of the development of action. And finally, discuss our own contribution, our Office for Climate Education in France. Now, the youth. Of course, we have seen the March for Climate in many countries. We know the role of this Swedish girl on this graph. We have been observing a large number of surveys. I will give you just one example in France, but those have been done in a number of countries. They are all converging. The youth today, and youth, I mean 6 to 25 years old, see the future as catastrophic. And this was before, sometimes, the pandemic, certainly before the war in Ukraine. So this is the future our young people see, our children see. There is a very interesting paper. I wish you read it. I'll give the reference later. In the Lancet last January on analyzing in many countries anxiety and fear related to climate. We have to listen to those scientific studies because they give this figure of the young people. Of course, there are other aspects. We know that in many countries, that is true in France and in Europe in general, students, when they are coming to the moment they make their career choices at the end of their studies, are very careful on asking their future employer, what do you do about climate and biodiversity? Are you on the good or the wrong side? So all those are positive, and despite the negative risks of anxiety and fear, we have to consider that we owe those young people some climate education. In France, we have eco-delegates in many schools, but I like to quote a conference which was called in Canada by Ipcc in 2017. And the young people, many were present from a large number of countries, were asked what are, according to you, the biggest barriers to addressing climate change. And you see, the overall factor is lack of awareness. So that's what we have to build, awareness. Of course, some of them say it's not my responsibility, and some would say I don't care. But you see on this survey made in France last year, published in June by a newspaper like Wine France, and we have had another survey more recently in France, which tells essentially the same message. The theme was ecology, and the young people were 16 to 25 or 30 years old. And 80% expect a catastrophic future. This is dramatic. And number one, ecology means for them climate. Now, if we look at how those interrogated people behave themselves or see themselves as actors, we see that indeed 1 out of 5 is engaged, and 1 out of 5 is certain that technological solutions will avoid drastic changes. Why caring about climate? Because we will take care of that, geoengineering or other sources. 20% do not care, indifferent. Yeah. So it leaves nearly half of the young people which are conscious of this catastrophic future, but are in a sense not feeling or not considering they could act, that something could be done. This is a kind of passive, pessimistic attitude. And as I said, again, other surveys confirm this. I would be surprised if in Pakistan the score would be very different, but it would be very interesting to test. Now, at the COP26 in Glasgow, for the first time, there was a full half-a-day session on climate change education with Minister of Environment and also some ministers of education. And at the tribune, ministers, one after the other, succeeded in pledging that they would do something. And I take this photograph of one. Do something, but what? Focus on sustainable development goals in their curriculum, rather than a more specific focus on climate, on teachers training, empowerment, and awareness. My personal opinion, and I share this opinion with many people, including in UNESCO, and of course with our Office of Climate Education, is that the second line, this focus on climate, teachers training and empowerment, is more important than a general focus on SDGs and curricula. It doesn't mean that SDGs and curricula are not important, but it means that the goal is so urgent that we have to do things quickly. At the COP, we organized a teacher's COP, and I will mention some of those conclusions, and UNESCO made a one step further in the presentation of their analysis. Now let me just say a word on SDGs. Now, UN Agenda 2030, which is a reference for all our countries, has three goals: eradicate poverty, protect the planet, ensure prosperity for all. Those three goals are subdivided in 17 more specific goals. One of them is education, another of them is climate. But that's too broad already, so it's broken down in 169 subdivisions. And if you look carefully at those, you see that almost every goal has a connection, and every goal of the 17 has a connection with all the others. So you can easily compute the number of connections. Now, how to translate this in curricula, in teacher training, in classroom activities, and how to provide a structured vision for students. It's very complex. And this is why our thinking is that it's better to focus on a more modest goal, climate change and biodiversity, because those two subjects, first, they interest the students very much, and second, they have a scientific coherence. The messages come from the science, and the actions are also inspired by science and technology. This is why at the COP, we organized a teachers' COP. We prepared a gathering of 100 teachers from 10 countries which we interrogated on propositions they would make to implement climate education in their school. There were 4 sets of propositions, and finally in Glasgow, at the COP, we made an event which has, of course, at distance, a large number of participants and the production of a statement, the voice of teachers. And this statement is available, and I think it might be interesting for you to discuss it in detail and to confront the recommendation on those 4 propositions with the actual capabilities that schools in Pakistan or in neighboring countries within the EcoSF Foundation would have to implement them. Finally, the UNESCO has progressed from the 2019 report to a new report, which is available, and I recommend the reading of it. And here are the 4 recommendations, and it's very convergent with what I have presented. Climate change education should be a core curriculum component in every country, but changing curricula takes a long time, and we cannot wait. Climate change education should be integrated across all levels and disciplines of learning. This reflects the essentially interdisciplinary and systemic aspect of climate of the Earth. Teachers and school leaders need to be prepared, and this is absolutely essential because they are not, and we will see why they are not. And then we have to focus on head, heart, and hand. I have made this point before. This report has an illustration which shows that in many of the countries which have been looked at by UNESCO, nothing is done yet. We have to progress from this situation. So a few words on the preparation of teachers to climate change education. As you will have realized, of course, the first difficulty is this systemic interdisciplinary aspect of the climate system to understand its complexity. And of course, because subjects are separated in school curricula today, we have to build up some connection and systemic vision. I just outlined a few of those aspects in more detail. The Earth system and interdependency between land, ocean, atmosphere, long-term and short-term in space and time. For instance, the warming of the ocean happens every year, but the cooling would take over 1,000 years just because of the inertia of the system. It's not so obvious to understand. The orders of magnitude of effects which are much beyond what the student will feel in the classroom. We have to understand the feedbacks, the positive and the negative. The fact, for instance, that the change of temperature met the Arctic floating ice, and instead of having a white surface, one has a dark sea surface, and that makes a big difference in the way the solar energy is absorbed by the Earth. This is the type of feedback which amplifies the change of climate. Of course, instabilities, catastrophes, space transitions, and the conclusion for risk, both for human and for biodiversity in general. And finally, another difficulty is to make understood the models. How can the science speak about the future in 10, 20, 30 years? Is that solidly established? How solid are those projections? What are the probabilities? You see that this list of problems is, of course, something which cannot be dealt in a single class or in a single topic at a single level of school. It has to be included in a strategy of learning. But that's not all. I have spoken about building trust between those scientific conclusions and the youth. And of course, in many countries, the pandemic has shown this lack of trust with respect to science being exposed to the public opinion. Then there is the agency. How do teachers help overcoming the feeling of being powerless of the student, balancing anxiety with words and acts? And I like this quote from Saint-Exupéry, the famous French writer, about humility. Of course, the problem is immense, and we are very little, and each student feels powerless. But self-deprecation doesn't help. It's, on the other hand, the very principle of action. And then I have spoken also of empathy and solidarity as part of the construction of climate education. Now, this is stepwise. I don't think in primary school we have to do much in climate change itself. It's generating too much anxiety. Discovering the earth, its beauty, its fragility, is something which fascinates the curiosity of young students, and it provides a very solid background for the next step in middle school, where we can address climate issues with science in all scientific subjects. It was clear from what I said, and begin to be active by little actions, for instance, computing the carbon balance of the school, or other activities similar to that. In high school, one can be much more focused, and in France, for instance, since 2 years, we have established a dedicated interdisciplinary curriculum for many students. Might be interesting to exchange with Pakistan or other countries on this curriculum. And finally, higher education was also a challenge, building up on those steps. And I can quote 2 examples. One in California, which works for the 12 campuses of California University, called Bending the Curve. And in France, we have now a report on a 5-year action, which should hopefully be started with our next government after the forthcoming election. Let me conclude by a few words on our Office for Climate Education. We created it in the wake of the Fondation La Main à la Pâte, which many of you know already, 4 years ago, with an office in Paris, a large network which built up, of course, on the La Main à la Pâte network in about 30 countries, and a team which keeps increasing. We have now 11 members, and this gives you a few examples of the activity of our office. Excuse me. This is an example of reports. You have the Ocean and Cryosphere Ipcc report, of course, but this cannot be read by teacher. It's too complicated. They don't have time or the tools. So we have to make summary for teachers which are adapted to them and published in several languages, French, English, Spanish, etc., to be the basis of their own understanding of the science. It simplifies, it explains, it illustrates, and it focuses on activities, of course, which are for the classroom. Those are turnkey teacher's guidebook. The one on the left is on the Ocean and Cryosphere report, and the green one is on climate change in land, another Ipcc report, and this is just art. It's big books, 200 pages, with a lot of pedagogical background to be implemented, and I insist on the word turnkey, because those are lessons which can be used with the surrounding documentation by teachers who are not prepared to understand this climate issue. Finally, we have now a network in Latin America with 2 lead countries, Mexico and Colombia, and several others as partners. And we hope that we could build such a network of local partners, because climate impact ends up locally, of course, with partners in Africa, and why not with partners in your surrounding with the ECO-SF Foundation. This would be really something for the 5 coming years which we would really like to consider. You will have an example during the workshop you have this week, that of the type of activity that OCE is doing. Those are short references which you could read. I think this reaches the end of my talk. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you the best for this conference.